Hey everyone, and welcome to today's Explainer. We're going to step into a bustling, globally connected world that was thriving centuries before the year 1492. We so often hear history told as if the globe was completely disconnected until European ships crossed the Atlantic. But the sources we're looking at today reveal a completely different, incredibly dynamic reality.
Okay, let's dive into this, because it's time to shatter the illusion of an isolated ancient world. Yes, global contact absolutely exploded after 1492, but trade and technology had already been making the globe a connected, shrinking place for centuries. Long before anyone in Europe was even looking for a direct route to the Indies, the gears of global migration and commerce were already turning at an astonishing pace.
Let's start with Section 1, the world before 1492.
Just look at the sheer scale of these overlapping, epic migrations happening globally across these centuries. Between 800 and 14 CE, voyagers from Polynesia discovered and populated the Hawaiian Islands. And this is truly awe-inspiring. They didn't just float aimlessly. They intentionally navigated the massive Pacific Ocean in giant canoes, bringing family members, seedlings, animals, and tools, the whole shebang. By the time that contact ceased around 1400, Inuit peoples had completed an incredible settlement of the Arctic, stretching all the way from Siberia to Greenland. Meanwhile, from the 11th century onward, Arab traders were highly active in the Indian Ocean, bringing sailing technology, a written language, and Islam with them. And then, between 1405 and 1433, China launched 7 massive maritime expeditions led by Admiral Zheng He to open trade and announce Chinese power.
Now, what's really interesting about this slide is the incredible contrast in maritime muscle. Admiral Zheng He's Chinese fleets completely dwarfed anything in the Mediterranean. We're talking tens of thousands of sailors on ships so massive they would have made European vessels look like bath toys. His 5th and 6th expeditions even reached the coast of East Africa, tapping into a vibrant commercial region where Swahili city-states met the Islamic world. It was a massive global footprint, even though China's leaders later turned their focus inward to a continental empire.
Moving overland, we hit the Pax Mongoliae. Ironically, an empire built on ruthless conquest ultimately brought the unprecedented political stability needed for safe, long-distance trade. This stability created an insatiable European appetite for Asian goods. Principally, things like porcelain, spices, silks, and tea flooded into European markets over the Silk Road. This created immense new wealth, represented by powerful merchant guilds, in cities stretching all the way from Seville to Bruges.
Moving on to Section 2, Early Norse Explorers.
So, shifting our focus geographically to Western Eurasia, the Scandinavian seafarers were incredibly active. At their peak, they sailed as far east as Constantinople and raided as far south as North Africa. They established colonies in Iceland and southern Greenland, where thousands lived, and around the year 1000, Leif Erikson reached Newfoundland, in present-day Canada, calling it Vinland. However, this impressive expansion was ultimately doomed. The Norse colony of Vinland failed within a decade. Driven by a combination of limited resources, inhospitable weather, food shortages, and resistance from the Inuit, they were pushed back to the sea. They beat Columbus by nearly 500 years, but because of their isolation, their incredible ventures remained largely unknown beyond Scandinavia.
Next up, Section 3, blockades and new routes.
All this expanding trade didn't just bring spices, it brought ideas, helping spark the Renaissance as they rediscovered Greek, Roman, and Muslim knowledge. But then, Europe hit a massive historical roadblock. It was a brutal chain reaction. First, the 14th century outbreak of bubonic plague, the Black Death, brought commercial integration to a halt. Then, in 1453, the expanding Turkish Ottoman Empire captured Constantinople. This effectively severed the primary Mediterranean trading hub that Italian merchants from Genoa and Venice had relied on to access the Black Sea and the Silk Road.
So I pose this critical question to you. With the Silk Road blocked and the Eastern Mediterranean controlled by the Ottoman Empire, how could Europe reach the East? Europe was essentially backed into a corner. Led by Genoese merchants, they sought alternative trade routes, and this desperation forced them to look outward to the vast, terrifying expanse of the Atlantic Ocean.
Which brings us to Section 4, the Iberian power shift.
To survive and compete, fractured European kingdoms had to drastically consolidate their power. This desperate need for resources fueled the Reconquista on the Iberian Peninsula. After 8 centuries of intermittent warfare and cultural exchange between Christians, Jews, and Muslims, Castile and Aragon finally joined forces.
The 1469 marriage of Fernando of Aragon and Isabel of Castile joined two of the most powerful kingdoms into what would become Spain, centralizing authority under a single sovereign.
Constant warfare led monarchs to form deep ties with merchants, simply because merchants had ready access to cash and paid taxes, unlike the nobility. But this newfound power came at a steep human cost. In the aftermath of the Reconquista in 1492, the Catholic monarchs compelled the remaining Muslims and Sephardic Jews to either convert to Christianity or leave. Portugal attempted similar forced conversions and expulsions beginning in 1496. To police the authenticity of those who did convert, the new Christians, the Catholic Church established the Inquisition. As our source outlines, this long history of begrudging toleration and repressive violence centralized taxation and military power, setting a grim precedent for overseas encounters.
Let's move to and see how this builds in Section 5, Tech, Driving the Expansion.
European expansion wasn't just a stroke of localized genius, it was a masterclass in borrowing globally. They navigated using the Chinese magnetic compass, calculated latitude with astrolabes perfected in Portugal, and maneuvered using Arab-invented triangular sails. They essentially crowdsourced the ultimate deep-sea vessel, the caravel. This was a ship with a deep draft for cargo that could finally brave the open Atlantic Ocean.
It's important to remind ourselves that this wasn't magic. It was a process of trial and error built on some incredibly intimidating failures. For instance, in 1291, Venice's Vivaldi brothers sailed into the Atlantic looking for India and literally vanished without a trace. Mariners had to painfully map out oceanic wind patterns. They realized they had to sail far west, deep into the open ocean, just to catch the wind patterns and currents that would carry them to West Africa, or to catch the Gulf Stream to cruise back home.
Let's zoom in on the climax of our explainer with Section 6, the first Atlantic colonies.
Spain and Portugal's first overseas colonies were islands like the Azores, Madeiras, Canary Islands, and Cape Verde. They were used as staging grounds for contacting sub-Saharan Africa. But gaining a foothold brought new patterns of destruction. The Azores, Canaries, and Cape Verde weren't just stepping stones, they served as a dark laboratory for colonization. The divide-and-rule tactics and demographic disasters seen here, where native Guanches, who had been isolated for millennia, were hunted, ravaged by disease, and assimilated, presaged the devastation that Native American populations would soon face.
But consider this number for a second: 1,000. Relying on Stone Age weapons, the Guanches inflicted 1,000 casualties against a heavily armored Spanish army on Tenerife in 1494. They fought back fiercely. Actually, the final campaign to conquer the islands didn't even conclude until 1497. This proves that European dominance was neither immediate nor uncontested. It was fiercely fought every step of the way.
Amidst these wars, a chilling economic engine was built. Step 1. Merchants learned sugar cultivation in the Levantine Mediterranean. Step 2. The Portuguese transplanted this system to the highly fertile volcanic soils of the Atlantic Isles, like the Madeiras and São Tomé. And finally, Step 3. Realizing the immense profits, this entire brutal regime, fueled by enslaved African and Eastern European labor, was packed up and transported directly to the Caribbean and Brazil.
Which leaves us with this final, truly provocative question to ponder. If these Atlantic islands were just the prototype, what did that mean for the fate of the Americas? We've seen how centuries of global trade, shifting powers, borrowed technologies, and ruthless colonization models all perfectly aligned in the Eastern Atlantic. It completely reframes 1492 from a sudden discovery into the next inevitable, turbulent step in a rapidly connecting world. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer. I hope this helped you see history in a whole new light.